Hello and welcome to Mickeyology, where we take Disney a little too seriously. I'm Austin Rathon. If you've been watching the channel for a while, then you know that we do a series on this channel where we compare a Disney movie to the folktale or book that inspired it, and you guys have been leaving some great comments on those videos and bringing some great insights of your own on these stories, and I wanted to share those and react to them now. So let's get started. Our first comment is on the Jungle Book. You said, I never read the book, but I did learn the very interesting fact that Kaa is not an enemy in the original stories. That was wild. Yeah, agreed. So Kaa in the Kipling Jungle Book story is not really a villain. Kaa is more just this mysterious snake that is recruited to help rescue Mowgli. So yeah, it's a pretty different character. And if you think about it, Kaa in the Disney movies, he is one of the creepier Disney villains of all time when you think about what he can do with his hypnotic powers. I remember even as a kid, I was uncomfortable watching the scenes where Kaa is using his eyes to hypnotize Mowgli and the others. It just feels very icky, which I suppose it's supposed to feel that way. But yeah, that is not how Kaa is portrayed in the original book. Next, one of you said, I think the Perrault version is the best one to tell children without having to censor anything. Not that I don't like the Grimm version. As a matter of fact, Into the Woods managed to present even the few ugly parts look very comical. Yeah, I think Perrault is almost always, as far as I know, Perrault is always the more family-friendly version compared to the Grimm brothers. Grimm brothers, great stories, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I would definitely, for a younger child, unless you're trying to really scare them straight, I would probably choose a Perrault version of a fairy tale over a Grimm version. And speaking of Into the Woods, you are right. That show, I've only seen the movie, I haven't seen the stage show, but the movie makes everything, even though it's very dark, still look very comical. And that movie's PG. There's a lot of stuff that goes down in that movie for it to be a PG, but they somehow retain the darkness while still keeping it comical and light, which I think is very interesting. I think Sondheim pulled something off really interesting there, where he's able to keep the darkness but also have the comedy in that show. So this person says, I actually think that the original story doesn't take place in China. The French author who brought Aladdin to Europe actually learned the story from an Arab storyteller. Back then, in the Arab world, people referred to a place as China when talking about a far-off fantastical land, similar to how Westerners viewed the Arab world back then. So really, the original Aladdin takes place in a land reasonably far from the Middle East, but still where Islamic societies ruled by sultans can be found. I personally think that the original story might take place in India during the Delhi Sultanate. Thank you. That is a very fascinating insight. That's very interesting to think about because it doesn't feel very Chinese in the telling of the original story. If you've read it, you know that they're using a lot of Islamic stuff. And yeah, and I like the idea of Aladdin being set in India because I think that's where the Disney animated movie takes place. And I know a lot of you disagree with me and you've told me so in the comments, which is fine, but I'm sticking to it. I think that Aladdin is an Indian story, at least in the Disney version, and maybe even in the original story. Really interesting comment here. You said, I am glad they adapted this story later on. I'm not sure what Rapunzel would be like if Walt Disney did it. Not that I don't like Snow White or Cinderella or Aurora, but I don't think Rapunzel would be as active if her movie was made back in that time period. That is a really interesting thing to think about. And I think that it's a really interesting question to think about, not just for Rapunzel, but for things like Little Mermaid and Frozen. Movies like this that were adapted later, but could have been adapted by Walt Disney back in the day if the studio had chosen to do them. I think that that's really interesting to think about. And I do think Rapunzel probably is in better hands later on than she would have been early. I don't think Walt Disney would have made a bad Rapunzel movie, but I do think that the version that we get now is better. Also, I know for a fact that she was better off being adapted after the Michael Eisner era, because at some point they were thinking of having a Rapunzel story called Rapunzel Unbraided, and that would have been the movie, and it was going to be set in like modern day San Francisco, and it just sounds like it would have been a mess. So, but I think Tangled is the excellent, a great adaptation of the story. This person says, I remember reading a living storybook of Pinocchio. I saw a Pinocchio cartoon on TV and read a wonderful edition when I was 7. It was also when I was 7 that I first saw Walt Disney's Pinocchio. Because of what I had read and was to read, I saw it as just that, Walt Disney's Pinocchio. Yeah, I think that's a great insight to have on these fairy tales, and that's the reason why I do these videos. I think a lot of people either get down on Disney or the original fairy tales and say, Disney, ruined this classic story and made it like capitalist, American, whatever. Or people get down on the original stories and like, oh, these stories are so weird or gross. And I think that, different stories speak to different cultures and different periods. And I think that when you can see a Disney film as just that, just being what it says on the box, this is Walt Disney's Snow White or Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty, then it gives you a more well-rounded view of the story. And I think it's kind of gives you some insights about storytelling itself. One of you said, I love both adaptations of the story. Personally, I think that the book had a beautiful, bittersweet ending. It also gave us the message that sometimes we are not going to get the things we want, no matter how many sacrifices we make. And a lot of you in the comment section said that you prefer the original story's ending to the Disney ending, which I think is very interesting. Agreed, I think the book is really great in that regard. I think the story is still pretty strange to modern ears, but it does have a beautiful, bittersweet ending, and it does send that message. And again, I think that's a necessary message, and it's okay to say sometimes it's not going to work out. Sometimes you don't get your heart's desire, no matter how many stars you wish on. I think that's one reason Disney changed the ending, because that doesn't really fit their branding as much, arguably. But yeah, I agree that this original story is very beautiful, particularly the ending, as bittersweet as it is. One of you said, I've read the Brothers Grimm version of Sleeping Beauty. She was named Briar Rose, and when the prince came along, the 100 years happened to be up, and the thorns cleared away, leaving the corpses of previous princes who had been eaten by the thorns. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I haven't read the Grimm version of Sleeping Beauty because in the Disney movie, they say that they went with the Perrault version, so I just did that one for the video. But it sounds like there was some influence from the Grimm brothers on the Disney movie too, so thank you for pointing that out. Next up, one of you mentioned regarding the Africans, because there are Africans in the original Tarzan book that were eliminated from the movie. You said, Disney limited the Africans out of the movie, but brought them back in the TV series in the form of the fictional Waziri tribe that Tarzan and Jane befriend when colonial people open a diamond mine on the tribe's land that pollutes the river. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. I am not as familiar with the Tarzan animated series. I only saw a couple of episodes when I'm a kid, but there were a lot of you in the comments that brought up the animated series and how some of the stuff from the book that didn't make it into the movie made it into the show. And a lot of you requested that I cover that as its own video in the future, which I'll definitely have to do. But I was very surprised how many of you are big fans of Tarzan the animated series from Disney. So there you have my reactions to just a few of the great comments that you guys leave on these videos. Please continue to watch, please continue to let me know what Disney material you would like me to cover, and please continue to add your insights. There's so many things, obviously, that you guys mention in the comments that I do not bring up or maybe even don't know about myself, and it's great for me to be able to learn from you, even as I hope you learn some things from me. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.